Wondering how at menopause and midlife you might be more susceptible to not only negative effects of stress and cortisol, but to the effects of insulin and of blood sugar. And you know where I'm going with this? Prediabetes and diabetes. My guest today is going to clear up all your questions, potentially some you didn't even know to ask. And not just for you, although, of course, it's about you. It may also be for the men in your lives who also go through, although on a lesser level, hormonal changes at midlife and beyond. I also want to point out a little human error on my own part, a little humorous, and it almost might be good to see how closely you're paying attention. But as I rattle off all of the celebrity sightings my guest today has had, rather than say NPR, I said NRP. Now, who knows if that's a sign of the times or what, but it was an error, and I just want to point it out so that if you hear it, you know we too caught it. And if you know me at all, potentially you know me enough to know I'm a good enough is good enough when it comes to do I do it all over again or do we get this important message out? And so here it is. Here's the message for you. I'm Deborah Atkinson. You're listening to Flipping 50, where I address your top struggles and concerns, and I share what to eat and how to move and how to change your mindset, often about what to eat and how to move, so you can have the energy and the vitality that you want, need, and deserve in this second and better half. Let's dive into this. My guest today is Dr. Beverly Yates. She's a diabetes expert and author who has over 27 years experience working with those who struggle with blood sugar issues related to type 2 diabetes and prediabetes and feel like nothing works for them. She uses her systems engineering background as an MIT electrical engineer in combination with her naturopathic medicine skills to help people achieve and maintain blood sugar control. Dr. Yates is an internationally recognized speaker and expert in the field of diabetes and heart disease. She's a published author of Heart Health for Black Women, a natural approach to healing and preventing heart disease, and co-author of multiple books, including one with Jack Canfield, The Soul of Success, Volume 2. By addressing the lifestyle factors that trigger blood sugar spikes, Dr. Yates creates breakthrough changes in the habits that cause blood sugar issues. This allows her clients finally to get off of the blood sugar roller coaster, have more energy, and create the level of health that lets them live the life of their dreams. She's the creator of the Yates Protocol, a simple and effective lifestyle based program for people who have type 2 diabetes or prediabetes to lower blood sugar levels, achieve healthy A1C and fasting blood sugar levels, and have more energy to live the life they want to. She's worked with thousands of people, helping them to lower their blood sugar levels to a healthy range and get control over their health. Dr. Yates is on a mission to help 3 million people heal from type 2 diabetes and prediabetes. She was chosen, listen to this, as the lead doctor for a new 3-doctor panel TV show on ABC. They filmed 2 versions of the pilot episode, and the network decided, unfortunately, not to greenlight the series. Her journey in Hollywood was fun and taught her a lot of things, which I can't wait to dive into. Dr. Yates has been featured in the media, including ABC, CBS, NBC, PBS. That is the alphabet soup there, girl. NRP, Fox, Sirius, XM, Mind Body Green, Essence Magazine, Good Housekeeping, Women's World, Reader's Digest, Rodale Press, and more, as if there were a need for more. Dr. Beverly, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, you're very welcome, Deborah. I'm excited for our talk today. I'm a big fan of your work and your message, your mission. Your overall vibe is just one that's so inviting and very much needed in today's world, where I think a lot of people feel pretty helpless sometimes about their health. They feel overwhelmed or like, why bother?
Exactly, exactly. And I think we probably are just equal fans. So right back at you. Love what you do, and I have to say, not just what you do, but how you do it. Love the energy and the vibe that you put into it. I mean, I can hear it right now, just in your voice that you bring it. So for our listeners who all are somewhere between about 45 and 70, and I know I have a couple of you know, men out there who love their women lurking, and I'm glad to have you. But listeners really are curious because we know about sensitivity or resistance. And why is it that women in their 50s are at particular risk for diabetes?
hmm these are the kinds of conversations that honestly I wish we had in middle school and high school, right?
Mm.
It's part of our health education in our school system. And unfortunately, the conversation isn't there at the earlier stage of life. And therefore, we aren't set up to win in terms of our health when we hit that 45 to 60, 70-year-old age window, right? There's a heck of a lot that changes. I think we can all appreciate at whatever age we currently are as we listen that going through puberty was a big deal. There was a lot that happened in a relatively short period of time. And the good news is, as we hit the mid 40s and older, we have a longer time window than we did in puberty for all of these transitions as we come to an end of our reproductive years. But boy, oh boy, we don't get a lot of good info and messaging about how to manage that. What's like a possible outcome? And if we've seen relatives, especially female relatives, struggle during this time, how can we avoid that? Like, if you have an aunt like I do who has talked about things where, in terms of menopause and hot flashes, for her, her most common phrase was, my own personal summer. That's how she would laughingly refer to her hot flashes, right? Exactly. So I knew in my teen years, something might change, but I wasn't quite sure what it would be. And other things like that. Your own family around you might give you some clues if the women talks among themselves and if the men talks amongst themselves, because men have hormonal shifts as well. Their cliff, in my opinion, is much quicker than most women's. I'd say we're a ramp and they're a cliff.
Mhm. So true. So, why are we at particular risk? I mean, obviously, women are out there thinking hot flashes, night sweats, gaining the weight, belly fat. But what is it? What else under the hood going on that puts them at risk?
There's a few factors that I think are not obvious. One is that for women, more so than men typically, there can be problems with sleep that emerge during this sensitive time window around the mid 40s, late 40s into the 50s. And troubles with sleep may or may not have anything whatsoever to do with hot flashes. Women can start to have situation where they just don't sleep as well. They don't sleep as deeply or for as long, even if they have a history of being an athlete, being otherwise healthy, eating healthy foods, thinking good thoughts, the usuals, right? That doesn't guarantee a straightforward on ramp here. And when these things start to spin out, it's good to recognize that it's a sensitive thing. If you aren't able to have good sleep, you are far more likely to have your metabolism shift so that you now go from fat burning to fat storage. And the fat will usually accumulate around the belly. The thighs might be more of a thyroid picture, but it could also be from poor sleep. And so it's a time window where all of this shifts. There's some really interesting research that hasn't gotten a heck of a lot of attention, but I was just gobsmacked when I first read it. And I try to tell everybody. It talks about how the pineal gland, which is the gland in your brain that makes your melatonin and drops it during the evening and the nighttime hours.
Hmm.
Well, it turns out as we age, the pineal gland for many people starts to calcify. To put that in simple terms, what that means is that gland starts to get smaller and atrophy in terms of the active gland tissue cells that can actually make and produce melatonin. You're losing capacity, folks. So if you have found that you don't sleep as well and you have tried all sorts of things and you still aren't getting relief, just know that your body may have shifted, it may have changed, and that might make a difference. It could be that simple.
Yeah, I certainly love that. My listeners are no strangers to tossing and turning, whether for a night or some chronically.
Hmm.
And then also experiencing cravings,
Mm.
often related to cortisol and blood sugar
Hmm.
changes.
Hmm.
So, big question was, does menopause related sleep changes give them, more risk for type 2 diabetes?
Yes, it does. Just to answer the question, let's dive in there on this aspect of cravings, because
Yeah.
this one I think is another factor that's maybe not, in my opinion, not promoted to the general public. Cravings can come primarily from two sources. One is poor sleep, not enough sleep, poor quality sleep. Those are one ways that you can develop food cravings
Hmm.
or cravings for sweets. The other way you develop it is just what you alluded to, Deborah, which is stress. The primary hormone cortisol, the primary hormone rather of stress is cortisol, along with adrenaline and noradrenaline, and those together really make the difference, right? So, like, if you need to be Superwoman or Superman in a moment and do something heroic, like lift the car off the loved one, your ability to respond to that stress with adrenaline, you know, with cortisol can be life saving. It has its role. The problem is for many of us in today's lifestyles, and my goodness, with the current global health threat, oh boy, people's stress levels are through the roof. And as a result, their cravings, it's almost like their blood sugar is being hijacked by events that are external. So your own mindset, your ability to exercise and clear your spirit, clear your soul, keep your mind and mental health in a good place are critical right now, because those have a direct impact on your blood sugar. There's many people who develop type 2 diabetes, and as I like to say, they didn't party their way there. There is this stereotype around type 2 diabetes and prediabetes that people have somehow fallen on their own sword. They deserved it. What did you expect? There's just all this judgment. It's nasty. It's also wrong hearted, because most of the time, if you actually do someone the courtesy of listening to what happened, you'll find that they actually could quite well be living a healthy lifestyle, eating good foods, exercising. And usually it's sleep or stress that has grabbed a hold of their blood sugar and dragged it up chronically. And as a result, now they have prediabetes or type 2 diabetes.
Let's dive into that a little bit more, just because this topic of stress is not necessarily one that I love to go down this road, but it's one that chronically comes up. And I want to come back to something else too, because literally just probably 2.5 hours ago, I had a conversation with a client, and I'd love to get your response to the question she asked me. We'll come
Sure.
back to that. So let's talk about stress resilience and what happens for women in their
Hmm.
fif- in their 50s.
Sure. So stress resilience is really key. And in the 50s, for many women, a lot of things shift and change. There's our hormonal balance, right? As we put our reproductive years behind us and button that up and go on to the time now left for the rest of our life, where the fluctuations and all of the changes that went with our reproductive years now will cease. It will come to an end. Some of us will say, thank goodness that's a wrap. Others of us might actually miss it. I think it depends on what your journey was like, right? Then in your 50s, you might also have a situation where, depending on your job or your career, that might be shifting too. And if things have gone the way you had hoped and planned and worked for, this might be a good time. If it didn't go how you had planned and worked and hoped for, then this can be a really stressful time, right? Because we know that ageism is a thing. And in the workplace, it can be that much harder as a woman to find any kind of a job that pays even reasonably well. You may also find that you're bookended. And by bookended, I mean you might be caregiving both for people younger than you, perhaps in your family or household, as well as people older than you, either in your family or household, particularly for aging parents, things like that. And that's a very real situation. And the pressures of that, the stress of that, the anxiety of that can absolutely make a difference for being able to do self care, being able to regularly exercise, plan your meals and eat good portions, do all the things that would be blood sugar friendly behaviors, right? You might really be feeling it. I know I personally went through that when my mother was diagnosed with cancer, and I'm an only child, and I put my all into loving her and caring for her in that last year of her life. But boy, did that take a toll on me, no question.
Yeah, totally get it. Ironically or not so ironically, I've just come back from visiting my next next week to be 95-year-old mom who's had a fall and fractured her hip. So we're in that moment for sure in our family.
I'm glad you're able to visit her. That's just a wonderful, loving thing to do. And congratulations to you and your relationship with your mom, and God bless your mom. That's amazing. 95. Wow.
95, but I'll tell you this. We'll take a little side note. We'll call this the halftime show, everybody. So there we were, Friday afternoon. She's in her new assisted living apartment where
Mhm.
actually that was my purpose for being there, is to help her adapt and kind of get used to it with somebody else there. And we were going to go down to the dining room to mingle with some of her new, homies, I guess.
Mhm.
And we were invited to happy hour. And so thought, this will be great. We'll just walk her down there. And she looked at me when I stood up and she said, "Your shorts are too short to be respectable down there." Now, now, girlfriend, I'm 57. And,
She is
so
always your mother.
I chose to take the up road and think, well, I'm so glad she's still a little feisty. She's still in control. That's good.
That's hilarious.
So there's that. All right. So you did not think you were going to get away with being on Flipping 50 without talking a little bit about exercise. So I'm dying to dive into your recommendations for exercise and particularly resistance training, but I'd
Yeah.
love to talk about something else. So it's long been the advice that so many clients or students would come to me, and their generic advice from many of their physicians would have been just walk.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to know what you say to that, and what is your advice to your pre-diabetic and those people you're concerned about, or diabetic clients, patients.
Absolutely. My advice around the exercise is, first off, when they ask me what's the best one, I say the best one is the one you will actually do.
Mm,
So we start there,
mhm,
right? Find something they enjoy, and it can be dance. It doesn't necessarily have to be quote unquote exercise at a gym or at a home setup for a gym, right? And then I emphasize for them resistance training or strength training because of two primary reasons. One, the muscle developed, and I'm certain everyone who listens to this podcast knows Deborah's just such excellent zone of genius around this. Those muscles are metabolically active. They
mhm,
take up blood sugar. So if you've got blood sugar issues, if you're struggling with type 2 diabetes, pre-diabetes, etc., if you have type 1 diabetes and are looking to have better blood sugar control, right? Get off the blood sugar roller coaster, then developing muscle is your friend. Those tissues are metabolically active and they look for glucose, blood sugar, as a primary fuel, as a way to keep going, right? Just like the brain loves glucose, so do your muscles. So, with that in mind, it really helps people to stay fitter without having to spend hour after hour in aerobic exercise, because we know with aerobic exercise it's great for the mind, it's great for the soul, etc. But if you're trying to control your weight, if you're trying to control your blood sugar, that's not going to give you as much bang for the amount of time you spend as resistance training or weight training. You can do kettlebell flows. There's so many different things you can do. I also think this keeps people out of trouble later on, Deborah, particularly in their 70s and 80s, from
mhm,
having their muscles atrophy, getting weak and losing their balance, and being susceptible to falls.
mhm.
That lack of balance that happens in proprioception when your joints aren't used to a load, to weights, I think has this cumulative crud effect over time and sets people up for a real problem when they age.
Love it. Okay. And so I have to go back and dig this in because you said it so smoothly, because I'm sure this is part of the Dr. Beverly Yates Bible. And yet, for listeners they've got habit gravity, they still are defaulting. Someone out there is thinking, but when I go to exercise,
Mhm,
shouldn't I walk? Don't I have to? I've gained weight, so I
mhm.
need to lose the weight. Don't I need to do the cardio? So I'm playing devil's advocate as if I were a listener. State some of that again.
Okay.
Why is resistance training so much more beneficial, even and especially for that woman who wants help with weight loss or weight maintenance?
The reason is that as you build that muscular tissue, it's metabolically more active, and it wants more of the very blood sugar that's already high. It'll help you dampen or mute that high blood sugar. It will fuel those muscle cells. It will keep you with better balance. You will spend less time. So instead of spending an hour running or an hour walking, 20 minutes of real resistance training and weight training will be sufficient for most people as long as you use an adequate amount of weight. And from what I've seen, tell me if this is right, Deborah, because I've studied this one pretty intensively. Tell me if you agree that it's about the intensity. So you want to lift the heavier weights. So you're not trying to do like 2 pounds and 5 pounds of weight in 50 reps, but instead you want to use heavier, much heavier weights and go to your limits.
Amen. God bless. Amen. Yeah, we're just preaching. Okay, that is exactly right. And all my listeners I know could have vouched for that and said, yes, she's right. It's good. Okay. But I also want to come back and visit one thing
Yeah.
that you said. So if we do the strength training, we can do this for a shorter period of time and get more done,
Mm-hmm.
get more benefit. And also want to remind listeners, it also is longer lasting. You're
Yes.
changing your muscle tissue, and you said that, but I want to get across to them, we're not concerned with how many calories do we burn during that 20 or 30 minutes.
No.
It's how do we change the metabolism for the rest of your life?
Yeah.
What happens by the end of the year and the end of the next year? That's what really matters. And if you exchange it or think in your head, but that cardio burns more fat, and that's a myth, by the way, dear listener. So, but we can also get in trouble. Listeners can get in trouble doing that for the reason we mentioned earlier, cortisol.
Yeah.
So if they're already stressed and then they think I've got to lose more weight, I've got to lose this weight I've gained because of my stress, and I'm going to go try and exercise it more, that is stress.
Right.
Talk a
You
little bit
defeat your
about that.
purpose. You
Yeah.
defeat your purpose. So your blood sugar goes even higher. It certainly doesn't come down, right? And as such, with all that extra blood sugar floating around, the body says, well, geez, the blood sugar represents potential energy. If you have any kind of insulin resistance, and really who doesn't at some level, the insulin's not effective to grab up that extra blood sugar and bring it inside the cell to make it available for energy. Instead, it stores it as fat. If you want to break that cycle, you need to build muscle. Resistance training will be your friend. I think in my own case, like I was a athlete. In fact, that's how I found out I was pregnant. Was from working out. And I was playing on a women's basketball team, and I was like 38. That's when I was pregnant with our first child. And long story short, the biggest change for me in terms of motherhood and having clinical practices and founding a residency program here in California and all the things that I did was my piece of self-care that went completely missing was weight training, resistance training. And I feel like the amount of muscle tissue I had built up from my teen years, 20s, 30s bought me time. But by the time I was in my mid 50s, things had shifted. And then I saw what I could feel was a definite change, not only in weight, but in muscle mass and in body proportions, right? So now I'm just embarking on this journey of resuming weight training, resistance training, because I realize for me, that's probably a very sensitive thing. And I've gotten a hold of stress and sleep. I feel like I've completely recovered as much as I possibly can in this lifetime from my mother's death. And I'm doing what I can now for self care and to manage aging as I go forward. But I know in my bones that weight training, resistance training is just so helpful for people, and it's time efficient. So anyone who's listening to this is like, oh my God, I don't have time. Yes, you do. I
Mhm.
feel like if you don't make time for these things somehow, then you are making time to be sick later. And I
Mhm.
just want to say that bluntly. I
Yeah.
know that year that was so hard when my mom was sick, I would literally some days, Deborah, I'm not exaggerating at all, I would carve out 4 to 5 minutes, actual minutes, my friend, just for myself, where I would breathe. I'd take obviously a really short walk, whatever, but I did whatever I could that year to keep from falling completely apart because it was that hard.
Mm, yeah. I'm sure there are a lot of listeners who can actually relate to that, those
Yeah.
minutes. Yeah. And okay, I want to ask you another question. As you're working with women who maybe are pre-diabetic or diabetic, and you're wanting to get them started in some kind of exercise initiative,
Hmm.
knowing that you're favoring resistance training if you can get them in that direction,
Hmm.
one of the pluses, I believe, for beginners or for women, men too, children for that matter, who are maybe on the heavier side,
Hmm.
is that resistance training is a type of exercise that allows them or enables them to be successful earlier with potentially a little bit less discomfort and effort.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do agree with that. It's interesting. I've been so honored in my career to have the chance to work with people who have some complex health histories. My goodness, you talk about, it's not obvious kinds of things that are interconnected. And it's one of the reasons why I have systematized and organized my work the way I have, because I began to realize where there were some patterns and where it was important not to make assumptions about people, that everyone's journey is different. And when you see an individual within a family or an entire family where they're all struggling with their weight and their body mass, it's important to know, did they grow up around like an oil refinery? Or maybe they were in an agricultural area that had a lot of herbicide and pesticide sprayed, et cetera. There's a lot of paths to these issues. And in the case of there's a lot of extra weight already and someone is starting from that place, it's important to have exercise that's comfortable. It's not doing any further damage, let's say, to joints or range of motion. So being able to get to a pool, being able to do weightlifting and strength training is just so helpful without causing further damage. And one of those privileges I've had is working with people who can't even really do substantial exercise. They are so injured that going on a run or riding a bike, something like that, it might not even be possible.
Hmm.
So it forced me to focus in on nutrition, stress, and sleep. And as they became less in the world of pain through the things we were doing in these other places, they felt better, had more energy. Then we could add in the exercise. And we always started with the things that were the most helpful and the least hurtful. So we're looking for the most impact with the least amount of pain. And weight training, strength training would definitely be at the top of the list.
Yeah, love that. Love that. And I'd really love to, well, I've got you here, have you take a step back
Mhm.
potentially and explain for listeners how how you eat, blood sugar rises, insulin comes in, and how during menopause potentially it may take more and more insulin to help get the food particles or the energy from food into storage, and why that's such an issue when it requires more and more insulin or you're less sensitive to it.
hmm Yeah. So the big dance that goes on, particularly for women, as the hormonal balance starts to transition, is that the relative ratios and the total amounts of two primary sex hormones, progesterone and estrogen, change. Both of them are dropping. And as a result, because progesterone's dropping, you're not probably going to feel as calm. You may even have outright panic attacks, right? You might feel more anxious. You might be a person who's never experienced that before, but here you are. You may also find that with estrogen, you may have a period where you're more irritable and you have more mood swings, etc. And so they're both decreasing, and their relative balance between each other is not good either. And at the same time, your stress resilience, your body is putting out, because of the drop of these other hormones, now a different hormone, the stress hormone called cortisol, is increasing. And it's kind of unopposed, if you want to think of it like that. So as two drop down, estrogen and progesterone, cortisol comes up. When cortisol goes up, our bodies are historically primed to think we are running from a tiger or a bear. Now, if you were running from a tiger or a bear centuries ago, millennia ago, right, before we had 24/7 supermarkets and cars and whatnot, there was a real threat. You needed to get away. Well, we're built to be able to be amazing, but for short periods of time, it's not sustained. When your body, for whatever reason, perceives that you're under threat for a chronic, long period of time, for weeks, months, God forbid, years, other things start to compensate. And so you get much more energy efficient at retaining the stored energy called fat. There's a reason why men and women don't have the same level of body fat in general, and certainly not at the extremes of performance. You can look at the Olympic athletes, you can look at the female swimmers and the male swimmers as just one example. The female track and field athletes and the male track and field athletes, and you can see a different level of what is just a visible body percent of fat. Why? Because women can hold the human race. We're the ones who carry the babies. And so my thought has always been, we're more calorically efficient. We're going to be much more stubborn to lose weight and more easily gain it because it sustains life. Now, this was back in times when it was literally feast or famine. Again, we didn't have 24/7 supermarkets. Now, in today's world, this is actually a problem. It's a new moment in the human span. So that's my thoughts on that. And if we can, I'd like to circle back on just one thing about cravings.
Please, yes.
So in this context, in our 40s, 50s, we might come to a place as we approach our 60s, that we might actually start to experience food cravings. And maybe that's not typical for us. If you aren't someone who's an emotional eater and you suddenly feel like you're craving certain foods, particularly if they are either high calorie foods or high carbohydrate food, either comfort food, savory, umami kind of food, or just sweets, just know that disruptions in your sleep or lots of stress, either one, affects two hormones we didn't mention before called leptin and ghrelin. And a relative imbalance between the two can mean that you either become a bottomless pit, you can't tell when you're full, you lose that sense of satisfaction or satiety. The other one that can break is your sense of hunger. Your sense of hunger might become really outsized. And if you are recognizing yourself from what I'm saying, please do get help with these things because you don't have to struggle.
Love it. Yes. And so many of our readers recognize those terms. So I shared all of those in You Still Got It, Girl, the After 50 Fitness Formula for Women
Great.
book. So hopefully many of you are reviewing that, or if you've already done the course, but definitely take a look at those and heed those. Rewind that, play it again if you need to, because those are so very important. I want to ask your take on this because we're talking about cravings.
Mm-hmm.
What's your feeling that cravings sometimes can indicate there's a need for something, there's a missing micro or macronutrient?
Yes, sometimes it is quite specific. Like sometimes when people crave chocolate, if you do nutritional studies on them and do laboratory testing, because I always say test, don't guess,
Yes.
you might find that they're low actually in a mineral called zinc.
Yep. Love it. Love it. Okay. Dr. Beverly, so you're the expert. Is there a question that I should have asked you that we haven't hit on?
Um, that's a great question. Is there one? No, I think we've been really thorough here. The only thing I wanted to cover again was just the tie between the cravings and the other hormones. And we did that. I think this has been an excellent review and just a way to make this personal for people. You know, any one of us can be affected by these things. But please, folks, whoever's listening, don't stay stuck. Do what you need to take care of yourself. Everyone deserves to have great health.
Love that. Okay. Where is the best place for listeners to get more Dr. Beverly?
Yeah, hey, you're always welcome to follow me on social media, on Instagram and Facebook. You can go to @Dr. Beverly Yates. It's just literally my name in both places. I should hopefully have a YouTube channel coming up, put back together again with more active content. And also on LinkedIn, I'm there as well. If you type in my name, you'll find me there as women's health expert. Additionally, you can always go to my website, and that is www.drbeverlyyates.com. And you can connect with me there.
Fantastic. Anything coming up that you want to announce to our listeners?
Yeah, we are going to be releasing our type 2 diabetes group coaching program. We have some other offerings, but that's one of the ones coming up where people in a group format for a period of a few months can come together with myself and the health coaches and go through the things that are really helpful so people can be successful with getting a hold of that blood sugar and making it your friend and not something you have to battle.
Fantastic. Good. And have you got a place to send us, or do we need to pay attention and I can post something here later?
Yeah, I'll send you something and you can post it later. I want to make sure that everything's set up. I had some good surprises today with the agency for some of the things we've set up. I want to make sure I know how it works so I can give you the accurate link.
Right. The medicine is the easy part, right?
Oh my gosh, it is
Deliver.
actually. It's the rest of it. And I'm like, what?
Right. The things the pandemic helped us learn faster, right?
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
What a hot mess, you know? Hey,
Dr. Beverly, thank you so much for being here and sharing your expertise. It was so fun to talk.
what a joy. Thank you, Deborah, for inviting me on your show. I've loved talking with you.
All right, listeners. So now it's up to you. Was there a question that I should have asked that you would have that we missed? You can leave that at the show notes at flipping50.com/Dr. Beverly. And what are you waiting for? Let's start Flipping 50 today.
Yeah.